The Division of Education, Innovation and Energy welcomes you to its e-learning program. I'm Lenetta Clarke, and I'll be taking you on a biology adventure. If it's your first time joining us, be sure to view the other segments upon completion of this one. In today's segment, we'll be focused on speciation. We'll look at defining a species and describe how new species are formed. Biologists love to classify things depending on their structure and their characteristics. There are 7 subdivisions, starting from kingdom right down to species. Species is the final subdivision in the taxonomy, and it pinpoints the actual organism. So for example, here we are, man or humans. We belong to the kingdom Animalia, class Mammalia, family Homidae, and our species name is Homo sapiens. And this will distinguish us from the domesticated cat. Even though the kingdom and the class are the same, the order is different, and so too the genus and species name. So the species of this organism is Felis cactus. That's a specific name for that specific organism. So what is a species? A species is a group of organisms with similar characteristics that can interbreed producing viable offspring. So a species is a group of organisms with similar characteristics that can interbreed, producing viable offspring. Fun fact: when you cross a horse with a donkey, we have an organism called a mule. However, mules are always sterile, and therefore they cannot produce offspring. So technically, mules are not defined as a species within their own right. Speciation. This is a process where one species splits into 2 distinct species. And we have underlined the word process to remind you that whenever you see the word process, you need to think that there are several steps that take place over a period of time. Speciation does not happen overnight. Speciation can be caused by one of 2 things: geographical or physical separation. And by that we mean, for example, you can have a physical barrier, example mountains or rivers, or even a whole island, which over time create a physical barrier that separates the organism, which over time create a physical barrier separating organisms, which over time produce their own variants, which no longer resemble the original ancestor. So for example, in this particular diagram here, we have some trees, and for some reason we don't know, maybe an earthquake happened, and we have now a river and a rift or a distance created between the trees. And perhaps these trees on the east have more sunshine or more rainfall or some other environmental condition that have caused them to change their characteristics, so that over a period of time, not overnight, but over several generations, you have these variants here no longer resembling the parent trees, and so these two cannot interbreed, and therefore we have creation of a new species. We also have, for example, it is assumed that this isthmus here in Panama arose several million years ago, so that we have this particular type of fish, the porkfish, these two developing different characteristics over time because they have found themselves on different sides of the barrier here. We also have the examples of salamander in California, where over time, because of the creation of this mountainous region here, we have the original salamanders looking at having particular characteristics, but over several generations, we have salamanders which look very different to the parent. The same example or the same reasoning exists for the different types of lobsters we would find in different parts of the Caribbean Sea and on this side of the Panama Channel or the Panama Isthmus. Similarly, we have lizards in Guadeloupe, which are found in different parts of the island, and each of these lizards have very specific characteristics so that they look very different to the parent. So we have different colors, we have different webbing on the feet, we have maybe they have different terrain, they have different food types, so that over time, because of the very physical separation of the different lizards, they went on to develop separately and create new species. So these lizards are no longer able to interbreed because they look very different from each other. We also have speciation caused by ecological and or behavioral differences amongst the newly emerging species. So ecological, after physical separation, the ecology of the two different areas in terms of maybe the types of predators which are found will dictate how the new organism will adapt to the predators in those different areas. Perhaps the habitat, the terrain, or the types of food available in the two different locations will cause the organisms to adapt to the new conditions. We also have differences in resources, perhaps a different shelter. Some animals may take shelter on the top of a plant or top of a tree. Some animals may take shelter on the forest floor. So the different resources available may cause different types of adaptation, and therefore we have emergence of different species, all coming from a common ancestor. But once again, I want to emphasize that this takes a very long time to occur. We also have feeding times. Some animals may feed at different times, and therefore they are unable to interbreed to meet mates, and therefore those two different times, feeding times, will result in different species being formed. Mating rituals can be different among two different species. So although they may be surviving or existing in the same location, because they have a different mating ritual, one species will not interbreed with the other one. And then we have physical anatomy, things literally just not lining up, so that one organism is just physically incapable of interbreeding or reproducing with another one because their physical anatomy do not match or are not compatible. So we have here the meadowlarks, we have western and eastern meadowlarks, and these two birds exist in the same area. However, they have different mating calls. So because they have different mating calls, they are not going to interbreed. Even though they look physically similar, they are two different species. We have here two different species of sea urchins. We have the purple and the red, and they are incompatible. The eggs from one is not compatible with the sperm of the other one. So these two sea urchins may have come from a common ancestor, but over time they become incompatible to each other. Similarly, mangoes. I'm sure a lot of you have different mango trees in your yard, but you will almost never have interbreeding between the two of them naturally. So we have the pollen from one is incompatible to the stigma of another plant, even though it's a mango, it's different species of mango, so you would never have cross-pollination occurring naturally, even though they're in the same environment. And then, well, the problem here is obvious. We have quite a large dog with a smaller one, so we cannot physically see them reproducing or mating to produce a new offspring. So these two have physical incompatibility. The anatomies will not match up, will not line up, and they will not interbreed. So these are two different species of dog, even though several years ago they would have emerged from one common ancestor. So let's recap. We talked about species or speciation, and we now understand that a species is the final subdivision in the classification hierarchy, and it determines or singles out a specific organism. We looked at how speciation occurs, whether it's by geographical separation or by biological or behavioral, ecological or behavioral differences, resulting in the emergence of two distinct species who are unable to interbreed. So I thank you for paying attention, and do join us for more biology segments in the future. Stay safe.